Hello everyone, myself Madhav, Faculty of Science at Bhat and Bhat Tutorials. So in this online session, I'll start the very first chapter in biology section, that it is life processes. This is one of the very biggest chapter in your 10th standard CBSE and state board, and also this has more mechanisms to understand. So we'll go one by one in detail. So in this chapter, basically you have many important factors about, say first we have to start with nutrition. Second, we have to start with digestion. And third one, it is respiration. Fourth one, it is circulation. And fifth one, it is excretion. So now, when I say this terminology called as life processes, why do I need to study about nutrition, digestion, respiration, circulation, and excretion? These are the 5 main factors. So let me write it here. These are the very important factors which confirms that the organism is living its healthy life. And so nutrition, digestion, respiration, circulation, and excretion. And in some part of the chapter you have to study with respect to plants, and also you have to study with respect to animals. I hope I'm clear for all of you. Why only we need to study only these 5 factors in this chapter? Basically because these are the 5 main important factors which is helping out for the proper functioning of our organism with irrespective of plants and animals. So now, before starting with this nutrition, digestion, respiration, circulation, and excretion, let me tell this to all of you. You have to understand what is catabolic process, catabolic process, and next one, it is anabolic process. So you have to be thorough with these 2 definitions, so that we'll start with the first one called as nutrition. So now what is catabolic process and what is anabolic process? Say for example, if I take this food is generally a complex structure. So let me write it here. Food, it is generally a complex, or let me put it as complex molecule. Food, it is generally a complex molecule. This complex molecule will be turned out into simple molecule. Complex molecule, this is the complex molecule, and this will be converted into the simple molecule with the help of what? With the help of biocatalyst. This biocatalyst, we call it as enzymes. So in the digestion portion of the chapter, you will be studying the entire enzyme list which is required for the digestion process. But for as of now, to only study this part of the definition, that is catabolic process and the anabolic process, I'm just taking this as an example. So food, it is generally a complex molecule, and this complex molecule will be turned out into a simple molecule with the help of what? With the help of biocatalyst. Biocatalyst is this is a complex molecule and this is the simple molecule. This conversion of complex molecule to simple molecule, say conversion of complex to simple molecule, we call it as catabolic process. This, what is the catabolic process? It is defined as the conversion of complex molecule into simple molecule with the action of biocatalyst. Now I want all of you to write the definition meanwhile along with me. So let me erase this anabolic process for as of now. Yes, how do we define catabolic process now? It is the conversion I want all of you to write along with me. It is the conversion of complex molecule. It is the conversion of complex molecule into simple molecules. Conversion of complex molecule into simple molecules with the action of, this is very important, with the action of enzymes. We define it as catabolic process. I hope everyone are clear with this definition, because to understand the nutrition part and the digestion part, you must be able to understand what is catabolic process, and then you have to understand what is anabolic process. So now let me put it in this way. Now, what is the catabolic process? It is the conversion of complex molecule into simple molecule with the action of enzymes. Now, after this catabolic process, I have also told one more word called as anabolic process. So ANABOLIC, anabolic process. Now, after studying catabolic process, definitely you will be having an idea about anabolic process. It is very simple. It is the conversion of simple molecule into complex molecule. It is the exact opposite of the catabolic process. Now, how do we define anabolic? What was the catabolic process? Basically, conversion of complex molecule into simple molecule. Now, how do we define anabolic process? It is the conversion of simple molecule into the complex molecule. So, it is the conversion of simple molecule into complex molecule. So this part, anabolic process and all, you have at the higher studies. Say for example, at first PUC, second PUC, you have to study in detail about anabolic process. But for as of now, we'll not concentrate much on the anabolic process. Our main aim is to concentrate only on the catabolic process. I hope you are very clear with the definition. So complex molecule was the food, and the energy we have got from the food is called a simple molecule. So now complex molecule is converted into simple molecule. Process is called as catabolic process, and simple molecule is converted into complex molecule, and that process, what do we call it as? We call it as anabolic process. Now, you might question me, complex molecule to simple molecule, it is occurring in the presence of enzymes. What about anabolic processes? It will also take some enzymatic action, but along with some cell organelles. So as I have already told, we are not supposed to concentrate much on this anabolic processes. Only for the understanding purpose, I am explaining this anabolic process. Now, this both catabolic process and anabolic processes together, catabolic and anabolic together, we call it as metabolic process. So now it is working in the regulated way. So for example, catabolic process is also happening in the body, and even the anabolic process is also happening in the body. So these two might occur simultaneously or may not occur simultaneously, but anabolic and catabolic will occur in the human body or the organism, irrespective of plants and animals. That process together, we call it as metabolic process. I hope it is clear for all of you. So I think to start with the nutrition, you should have a basic idea. The first one we studied, it was catabolic process. Second one, we have studied about anabolic processes. Catabolic and anabolic all together, we call it as which processes? Metabolic processes. If you have understood this, human body has some sort of energy. The energy in the human body, it is in the form of ATP. Mark it as very important question for 1 mark. Abbreviate ATP. Now, how do we abbreviate ATP? So this is one of the very important question. ATP is abbreviated as adenosine phosphate. So ATP is in the form of ATP is the actual form of an energy present in the human being. So how do we abbreviate ATP? It is abbreviated as adenosine triphosphate. I hope it is clear for all of you. Initially we have understood the 5 factors. Now you have to recite, or you can just glance. We'll start from the beginning and then we'll go to the nutrition concept. So initially we started with the 5 factors. Which are regarded as nutrition, digestion, respiration, circulation, and excretion. So these are the 5 main factors which are very important for an organism, so that it is showing the human body is functioning properly, or the plant has a good metabolic process, animal has a very good metabolic processes. So these metabolic processes are mainly understood by these 5 main important factors, and in this whole chapter you will be studying all the 5 factors in depth. So nutrition, digestion, the entire digestion of food, you will be learning about that, and respiration you will be learning, and when it comes to circulation, you have to study the structure of heart, and then you will be having a double circulation, what kind of blood, there are 2 types of blood, and there is a carbon monoxide which binds to RBC cells. We'll go in depth at the time of circulation, we'll not worry much about it now. For as of now, next and the last one, we have to go with the excretion part. And when it comes to plant part of this chapter, you will be studying mainly about the transportation processes that is occurring in the plant. For example, xylem and phloem. Xylem will help in conduction of water, and phloem will help in the conduction of food. So these are the main 5 important factors which you have to study throughout the chapter. Now, before starting with a first concept, that is nutrition, you have to study the 2 processes which is occurring in the human body. Now, which are those 2 main factors? The first one, it is the catabolic process, and second one, it is anabolic process. Catabolic process is the conversion of complex molecule into simple molecule on the action of biocatalyst. Biocatalyst is regarded as an enzyme. I'm going to repeat it once again. Please concentrate here, all of you. Conversion of complex molecule into simple molecule on the action of biocatalyst is regarded as the catabolic process. You have to be very careful with the arrow mark. So let me write it like this. Yes, I hope you can see the direction of the arrow mark. So it is converting the complex to simple. What do we call this process as? Conversion of complex to simple. We call it as catabolic process. Very good. I say after now, simple molecules is also converted into complex molecules, which you will be studying it in your higher classes. You need not worry as of now. This simple molecule is converted into complex molecule, and that process we call it as anabolic process. Now, catabolic process and anabolic process together we call it as metabolic process. I hope I'm very clear to all of you. We have started with the catabolic process, then we went to anabolic processes. Catabolic and anabolic together it will form a metabolic process. This metabolic processes, again I'm telling, this metabolic process will release an energy. What it will release? It will release an energy in the form of what? Energy in the human body. So now since I'm taking only human body as an example, let me be very clear with that. Energy in human body. So let me write it here. Energy in human body, it is regarded as ATP. So how do we abbreviate ATP? Before that, mark it as very important question for 1 mark. And this ATP is abbreviated as adenosine triphosphate. So you can just glance for this one more time. Then let me start with the nutrition processes. If you want to write down, you can start writing with this, and please make it as soon as possible. And if you have any doubts, you can please leave a question in the chat section, and they'll definitely get you back. Should I text here only? Okay. I'll just wipe it. Thanks. Yes, I think we have we have already understood what is catabolic process, anabolic process, and these two processes together it will form a metabolic process. And also we have studied regarding the energy that is in the human body, which we call it as an ATP. How do we abbreviate ATP? ATP is abbreviated as adenosine triphosphate. So whatever the definition that I've explained earlier, that is catabolic processes and anabolic process, metabolic process, it is not about nutrition. It is the basic definition where you have to be very much clear before start with the nutrition concept. Yes, for as of now, the very first concept of this chapter, it is nutrition. So whenever I call this word as nutrition, what is the major thing that you have to understand? See, all the organisms will intake the food. Some will prepare on their own and some will depend on the other organism. So nutrition can be majorly classified into two types. So nutrition is majorly classified into two types. I'll go as slow as possible. Nutrition is the one where the organisms has to take the food for its survival. Some of the organism can prepare its own food. Some of the organisms will depend on the other organism. So there are two types. What are those two types now? The first one, we call it as autotrophic. First one, we call it as autotrophic, and the second one we call it as heterotrophic. So when it comes to nutrition, there are two types. The first one we call it as autotrophic, and second one we call it as heterotrophic. Now, how do we define the terminology autotrophic? See, organisms which prepare their own food. Organisms which prepare their own food we call it as autotrophic. And how do we define heterotrophic? These are the organisms which depend on other organism for the sake of food. So this one we call it as heterotrophic. I hope it is clear for all of you. When it comes to nutrition, generally there are two types of nutrition, which is that first type of nutrition that we have learned for as of now. First one we call it as autotrophic, and second one we call it as heterotrophic. If an organism prepare their own food, we call it as autotrophic. If the organisms will depend on the other organism, we call it as heterotrophic organism. I hope it is clear for all of you now. We have to start autotrophic in detail, and then we have to learn the heterotrophic in detail. So for as of now, let me take this concept called as autotrophic in detail so that you get to learn more about photosynthesis. Yes, before that, let me revise what and all I have done from the beginning so that you can write down if you have missed out any points. First, we started with the 5 main factors which are very important for a living organism. Now, please, you have to just tell it on your own, which are those 5 important factors. First one, it is nutrition, and second one, it is digestion. Third one, we went to respiration. Fourth one is circulation, and fifth one is the excretion. And also we have to write something related to the transportation of plants, that is xylem and phloem. That comes in the last part of the chapter. Will not worry so much about it for as of now. So before starting with the nutrition, I told there are some specific definitions that you have to learn so that you will understand the nutrition part very clearly. So what is that first one? First one, we started with catabolic process. So what is catabolic process? It is the conversion of complex food particles into the simple food particles. In the presence of what? In the presence of enzymes. So that we call it as catabolic process. If the simple is converted into the complex one, we call it as anabolic process. I hope it is clear now. Catabolic and anabolic together we call it as metabolic process. And also we have studied the energy that is related in the human body. The energy in the human body, it is in the form of ATP. Now, how do we abbreviate ATP? Mark it is very important for one more question, as I've already told. First, ATP is abbreviated as adenosine triphosphate. I'm repeating it for one more time. Adenosine triphosphate. Now, to start with the nutrition part, as I have told, nutrition is the one which is very important for all the organisms. Now, how many kinds of nutrition are there? Generally, there are 2 kinds of nutrition. First one we studied, it was autotrophic nutrition, and second one what we have learned is heterotrophic nutrition. Autotrophic nutrition is the one which it is the organisms which prepare their own food, we call it as autotrophic, and the organisms which depend on the other organism for the sake of food, we call it as heterotrophic organisms. I hope it is clear for all of you till now. We'll start with the autotrophic now. Now, if I'm starting this autotrophic organisms, earlier I have already told that autotrophic organisms are the one which prepare their own food. Now, which kind of organisms will prepare their own food? Yeah, best example we can take it as plants. Best example it is plants. Now, what is that main thing you have to understand in plants? Plant will exhibit a system called as photosynthesis. Plant will exhibit photosynthesis. Now, how do we define photosynthesis? You have to mark it as very important for 1 mark. Define photosynthesis. This can be asked for 1 mark, and you have to be very precise, or you have to be very perfect while writing a 1 mark definitions, or any definition if it is given for 1 mark, because it is just a mark. You cannot expect half mark. If you get it, it will be a full mark, or it will be a 0 mark. So how definition of a photosynthesis? Let me put it like this. Green plants prepare their own food. Green plants prepare their own food with the help of, very important now, with the help of raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water. So these are the raw materials which is actually helping out for the photosynthesis. Green plants prepare their own food with the help of a raw material such as carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. So this is the exact definition of a photosynthesis. Now, how do we define photosynthesis? Green plants prepare their own food with the help of raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. This process we actually call it as photosynthesis. I hope I'm very clear to all of you. Photosynthesis definition is read as like this. Green plants prepare their own food with the help of raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. So this is how we define the photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis basically has 3 steps. Photosynthesis basically has 3 steps. What are those 3 steps? Again, it is very important for the examination point of view. The first step, we call it as, the first step, it is called as absorption of sunlight. So this is the first step under the photosynthesis. Now, what is the second step under photosynthesis? Conversion of this sunlight. It is in the form of light energy. Sunlight, it is in the form of light energy. So it is the conversion of light energy into chemical energy. It is the conversion of light energy into chemical energy and splitting of water molecule into its constituent. So now this is the second step. Now, what was the first step basically under the process of photosynthesis? It is the absorption of sunlight. And what is the second step of this photosynthesis? It is the conversion of light energy into chemical energy and splitting of water molecule into its constituent. Now, why have I highlighted the splitting of water molecule into its constituent? See, this splitting of water molecule into its constituent, together we call it as photolysis. It is very important for 1 mark. Define photolysis. How do you define photolysis? It is the splitting of water molecule into its constituent. We call it as photolysis. And what is the third step in this photosynthesis process? It is the reduction of carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. So reduction of carbon dioxide into carbohydrates, we actually call it as the third step. Now, how do you understand this word called as reduction? See, reduction is nothing but addition of hydrogen, or it is the removal of oxygen. Yes, I think it is very clear for as of now. We first started with the process called as photosynthesis. All these things I'm starting with the autotrophic nutrition. First factor was nutrition. Nutrition has two types. First one it is autotrophic, second one it is heterotrophic. I'm starting with the autotrophic nutrition. Mainly it is seen in the plants. Plants exhibit a process called as photosynthesis. How do we define photosynthesis? Green plants prepare their own food with the help of raw materials such as carbon dioxide and water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. So this is how we define the photosynthesis word or the terminology. Now, what are the three steps that is present in the photosynthesis process? The first one, it was the absorption of sunlight. What is the second one? Conversion of light energy into chemical energy, and the splitting of water molecule into its constituent. Now, what do we call that word? Statement splitting of water molecule into its constituent, we call it as photolysis. Mark it as very important for 1 mark as again. And the third step, it is the reduction of carbon dioxide into carbohydrate. How do we define this reduction word? It is the addition of hydrogen. You will add hydrogen or you will remove oxygen. Both the process we call it as reduction process. So there are 3 steps in the photosynthesis, and this is how we define the terminology photosynthesis. All of you please go through this for 1 more time, then we'll move on to the detailed understanding of photosynthesis.